Hey, everybody. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's the 13th of November, 2019. I'm going to give everybody a moment to kind of log in here while we get going. And I know we're all really anxious to get back to these hearings and sort of see what happens next. I timed this right this morning because my aim was to wait until we had the Republicans doing questioning to get on here because I didn't want to miss any of Dan Goldman's questioning. And fortunately enough, I was able to kind of sort this out so that we could go live at a convenient moment, because predictably the Republicans have demonstrated already at the beginning of their 45 minutes that they don't really have any interest in either defending the president with any legitimate legal defense, or in getting to the truth. So good timing to wait to go live for an hour until we had gotten through the first round of this. I want to share just some primary observations about what we've seen so far, as well as explain to a few of you who are kind of confused about why Taylor's testimony is so damning, the exact reason why this is such a watershed moment for all of us. All right, so let me just make a couple things clear about what we saw this morning. We are hearing testimony from both Ambassador Taylor and George Kent, who is the Deputy Secretary of State for Eastern Europe. A couple things that I just want to make clear here. We knew that Taylor's testimony was going to be very significant. What we didn't know until about 45 minutes ago, a little more than 45 minutes ago, was that Taylor's testimony actually contains new evidence that is utterly damning to the president. It's really, I've said this on Twitter quite a bit this morning, but it's really hard to overstate the significance of the testimony that Taylor gave this morning. And I want to make one thing very clear about the strategy for how he did this, which was incredibly smart. His opening statement did not allow the Republicans to try to shred what he had to say. There was no opportunity there in questioning for anyone to ask him anything about what he was presenting in terms of the chain of events that took place with regard to Ukraine. So let me just say this, the absolute nail in the coffin moment this morning with regard to Taylor was this. He testified that he learned last Friday, I want to make this really clear, last Friday, that an aide of his had been with Sondland when Sondland had been on the phone with Trump shortly in that July window around this particular call. And fundamentally, what was conveyed as a result of that call was that, all Trump cared about, he didn't care about Ukraine. He didn't care about aid. He didn't care about Ukrainian soldiers dying at the hands of the Russians. What he cared about was whether or not Zelensky was going to go on CNN and announce that he was investigating the Bidens. And this was overheard by Taylor's own staffer. The thing that I just want to make very obvious here is that there's been an attempt in some of this to try to throw Giuliani under the bus, to make it look like this was an operation that didn't touch the president. Taylor's testimony this morning made it incredibly clear, just incredibly clear, how deep in this the president is. And I will say that from my own observations this morning, they are calling in the staffer, by the way, Lynn. They just announced this about 20 minutes ago. The staffer who was a part of Taylor's testimony is now going to be called into a closed deposition this Friday. So there's far more coming on this based on Taylor's new revelations this morning than what we know already. But let me just say this from where we sit at this moment in time. One of the things that from my own observation is incredibly powerful about the statements that we saw this morning, both from Kent and Taylor, is that it is very clear that Ukraine has been a burgeoning democracy, that their efforts to resist Russian aggression have been profound, and that Ukrainian soldiers are dying every day trying to stave off ongoing Russian occupation. Their reliance on U.S. aid to save human lives is real, and the failure of Trump to provide it cost Ukrainian soldiers their lives. So, this is one thing I want to make really clear here. It's not just the president was willing to barter our democracy, which is bad enough. It's not just that the president was willing to barter the 2020 election, which is bad enough. He literally was willing to leverage human lives, to get the Ukrainians to open a fraudulent investigation into Hunter Biden. I mean, I'm not overstating it to say that that's what this morning's testimony reflects. So one of the things that's particularly sad about this, and George Kent's opening statement was so profoundly powerful on this front, is that there are comparisons to be made about the birth of the American democracy and how we would never have been able to resist the English crown without assistance from overseas allies who supported our efforts at independence. The same is now true for Ukraine. And the president's unwillingness to support Ukraine until they were willing to satisfy his fraudulent, illegal ends undermines a democracy that is a linchpin in many ways to the health of the European Union and to the end of Russian aggression worldwide. So, a couple of things that I just also want to make clear about this. The chain here of evidence that was presented this morning by Bill Taylor in particular with regard to Russian aggression and Western democracies should not be overlooked. The president did jeopardize our national security by engaging in this particular course of action. He also jeopardized every other democracy that's been targeted by Vladimir Putin, because fundamentally what he did was say to the Ukrainians, we are not going to support you in resisting Russia unless you do what we want, unless you do what I want. You drum up false allegations to help support my personal political goals. And that in and of itself, by the way, reminder, we also learned this morning that Trump's favorite officials like Sondland were talking on unsecure cell phones to the president while in Kiev. Just to make this clear, that means the Russians were listening in on those calls. It also means that from where we sit right now, Putin is totally aware of the fact that the U.S., like all of the facility of U.S. security forces, including aid to Ukraine, was on the line because the president is so corrupt. That, by the way, is emboldening to the Russians. They know that they don't have a backstop at this moment in U.S. democracy that will stop them from doing things that are against democratic interests worldwide. It's really sad. I had a number of moments watching this testimony this morning where I almost got emotional about it because human lives have been lost because of this president's criminality. And the idea that, there was so much vulnerability in Ukraine, brand new president, very young democratic efforts there. Russia's still occupying 7% of that country. People dying every day, as Taylor himself testified. There was, a Ukrainian soldier who died last week in the area that is currently being resisted by the Ukrainians against the Russians. The idea that the president exploited that vulnerability on an international scale to the end of, what could be a real turning point for democracy against Russian aggression is really sad. It's sad from the standpoint of what we know about people with narcissistic personality disorders, sociopathic personality disorders, and the way in which they exploit individuals in relationships. Like we've talked about that on this broadcast for 3 years running now, right? We are seeing that now on a scale that is international, that impacts the entire planet. And to not be moved by the fact that the president was willing to let people die, willing to exploit, what was fundamentally a country's seeking of its own sovereignty, of its capacity to be a democratic society, resisting incursion from an autocrat, from a dictator. It's just really upsetting. It's just really upsetting and horrifying, and I have to say that, this is a moment where I hope everybody recognizes that however cynical and bitter we have been, this is incredibly serious. It's profoundly serious for our global security. It's profoundly serious for American democracy. It's profoundly serious from the standpoint of the EU. And, those of you who have wondered why I've been doing so much work in the last 6 to 9 months on the way that all this integrates with Brexit and Europe and everything else, it's because of this. It's because when we are compromised, and the opposition to that is Putin, and Putin has compromised our president in some way that we still don't know the details of, that implicates the security of every single person worldwide. Every single person worldwide. So if you care about humanity, you have to care about this. I understand that we are seeing, some really crazy antics from the GOP on the other side right now. But let me just say this. One of the things that I also think is worth noticing from this morning's hearings is the utter contrast between lifelong public servants. Taylor has been in public service for 50 years in support of America. contrasted with this crazy tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, Fox News world that most of us don't live in, showing up to try to combat this effort. The dignity and the grace on one side versus the insanity, the sycophantic nature, the cult-like nature of what we are seeing on the other side, is you can't ignore it. It's impossible to ignore it, right? Even on Fox News, they're having a hard time ignoring it. And the best legal minds out there, after this morning, I happen to agree with them, even though I'm not one of them any longer, on the front lines, is that there really is no legitimate legal defense to what we learned this morning about the president's conduct. There is no legal way to defend it. It is so blatantly obvious. It is so far over the line. And it is so supported by the evidence, by actual admissible evidence. And I would just want to reiterate this. Mark Meadows made this comment at the break about this all being hearsay. Direct witness testimony is not hearsay. Bill Taylor, George Kent sitting there swearing under oath, reporting what they saw and witnessed and what they heard. That's not hearsay. That's not hearsay. That's direct evidence of the president's crimes. There's really no way out of this for the Republican Party at this moment, other than to throw as much shit at the wall as they can drum up and hope that something sticks. I watched the first few minutes of Nunes while I was getting ready to get on here. I would just tell you, the fact that Ukrainian politicians were mad at Trump is not a defense to the president's crimes. The fact that there were Ukrainian officials who supported Hillary Clinton because they saw Donald Trump for what he was is not a defense to Donald Trump's crimes. The things that they're alleging right now are not actually a legal defense in a court of law to anything that the president has done. They're simply efforts to obfuscate, to deny, to turn attention in other directions and away from the facts here. Now, let me clear up a couple of things because there were some questions on the feed about this. I don't want any of you to sink your teeth into this idea that there's some corruption in Ukraine that needs to be investigated. All right, so let me just make something really clear here. And this is one of the ways in which this ties all the way back to Russia. One of the reasons you will notice if you watch the testimony this morning that there were other folks that were directly implicated in what was being discussed by Bill Taylor. Bill Barr was mentioned. Vice President Pence was mentioned. Pompeo was mentioned. Giuliani, Parnas. Again, this whole cast of characters, Lev and Igor, as we like to say, the indictees in the Southern District of New York were all mentioned in terms of running the shadow campaign with regard to Ukraine. So let me just make one thing really clear. Part of what's happening in the efforts of Bill Barr to investigate the origins of the Steele dossier, which ties directly into this, by the way, because this whole conspiracy theory about CrowdStrike and the server is that it was Ukraine that hacked the 2016 election and that the missing server is somehow being housed by CrowdStrike, which, by the way, I want to make this very clear. CrowdStrike has no relationship to Ukraine. This has been disproven over and over and over again. And again, Bill Taylor testified this morning that there's no legitimacy to the allegation that CrowdStrike was somehow involved in this inside Ukraine. Okay, so let me just make this clear. If Bill Barr and or Pompeo and or Vice President Pence and or Giuliani and all of his felony friends, were able to show somehow that Ukraine was really at the root of interference in the US election and not the Russians, that would give Trump a justification to lift sanctions against Russia. That's what's really at the root of all of this. It's not that there's some rampant corruption inside Ukraine. In fact, at this moment in time, with this particular president and this burgeoning democracy, all the evidence is to the contrary, as the testimony this morning shows. What they are seeking to do is create a false narrative that allows them to justify lifting sanctions against Russia. So all roads lead back to Putin. I mean, that's really where we stand. And it is incredibly important that people understand that, because I get that there is this idea of something appealing about let's investigate corruption in a foreign country, which, by the way, is not really our job. But please understand this. It's not like there's any dispute in the facts, or, by the way, in our multitudinous, more than a dozen intelligence agencies' conclusion that Russia interfered in the 2016 election. There's no evidence to the contrary of that, right? No legitimate evidence to the contrary of that. And that conclusion that Russia interfered in the US election in 2016 to get Donald Trump elected is what created the need for sanctions, not the first time, but the need for sanctions against Russia. Okay. And this is why Obama did what he did in between the election and when Trump took office. ejecting all of those diplomats from Russia, shutting down those 2 facilities. All of that. And by the way, the economic sanctions are one of the things that is incredibly important to Donald Trump, because it prevents the oligarchs from making more money. So this idea of investigating corruption in Ukraine is really about creating a false narrative that allows Trump to do Putin's bidding with regard to sanctions. It's nothing more than that. And I'm saying this as explicitly as I can because it's incredibly important that we understand what's really going on here. There is an attempt to interfere in the 2020 election by creating false dirt on Hunter Biden. And then there is this parallel issue of trying to find a way to blame someone else for the interference in the 2016 election so Trump can lift sanctions on Russia. There is no legitimate reason, no legal, moral, legitimate reason for the president to be demanding some investigation into corruption in Ukraine. I just want to make that really clear, like really, really, really clear. This is all about the president's corruption and manipulation of American democracy to serve his own aims, period. So, we all need to be aware that that's what's really going on here. All right. One other thing that I just want to point out from today's testimony that feels profoundly significant is that the Venn diagrams now have merged. I hope everybody understands that. But the allegations that were being made about Parnas and Fruman and Giuliani have now merged with what the president was up to in Ukraine. All of these characters have come together now. And by the way, there was some breaking news last night about about Parnas leveraging the president to get rid of Yovanovitch earlier on this spring. So at the center of all these Venn diagrams is President Trump. And one of the things that means at this moment in time is that there are some outstanding questions about what the Southern District of New York is doing in those criminal investigations vis-a-vis Giuliani, vis-a-vis Ukraine. So there's multiple threads happening right now on the criminal investigation front as well as impeachment. All right, key takeaways from today, because I just want to I want to give you a couple of other quick observations here. The Republicans have now, and I want to arm you all with ways to dispute this. The Republicans' talking point, one of the big talking points this morning, is that this hearing was boring. We saw this on social media. The press secretary tweeted it out. We saw somebody apparently mouthed it. A Republican representative mouthed it at a member of the press during this morning's hearing. This hearing is only boring if you don't give a shit about America. The testimony of Bill Taylor. There was someone on the Patreon feed, I'm not sure who made some comment about how Taylor's testimony was stumbling. If you think that was stumbling, I don't know. I can't help you, I guess. Because from where I sit, the testimony that was given by Bill Taylor is among the most damning witness evidence that I have ever seen. And you got to keep in mind, I tried cases for 15 years, really high-level security fraud cases. I've never seen a witness that solid. I think the Republicans know how bad it is. The fact that Jim Jordan left the room this morning in the middle of Taylor's testimony says a lot, because it's very clear that their strategy with regard to this has utterly failed. And so the real question now is what's going to come next. So there was some breaking news yesterday. I hope everybody was following this, that in addition to the testimony today and Yovanovitch on Friday, there's now additional days of testimony planned for next week, closing, including Vindman, by the way, who will be testifying on Tuesday, but closing with Fiona Hill next Friday. And I'm just going to say this, I said it last night, I should say it here again. If there is anyone who I would want to have close out public hearings on impeachment before articles of impeachment were filed in House Judiciary, it would be Fiona Hill. That's going to be another one that is just absolutely not to be missed. So from where we are, there is no fundamental defense by the Republicans. They are going to have their talking points. They do not actually have a legal defense to what he's done. And the testimony of Bill Taylor and George Kent this morning makes it completely obvious that the president was so far over the line that there's really no way to justify what he's done here. I'm kind of at a loss. There is no legitimate legal defense to anything that he has done. And that doesn't mean they're not going to throw, again, all sorts of shit at the wall. But you all should be aware that it kind of doesn't get any more damning than what we saw this morning. So that's that. I think my expectation for the rest of the day is that we are going to have some additional testimony. It sounds like Dan Goldman, by the way, is doing a great job as counsel for the majority, is going to have some additional questions this afternoon. We're working in these 45-minute blocks right now, which, as you can all see, I predicted this when the resolution passed. allows for the testimony to have a much greater flow, to make a lot more sense. There's a lot less posturing, no interruptions. Dan Goldman is doing this as you would do it in a trial, putting the focus on the witness, letting the witness tell the story, asking open-ended questions that allow the witness to elucidate all the truth that is present in this series of conduct and crimes. And of course, Nunes started off with his own pontification, which tells you once again everything you need to know about the fact that the Republicans are completely lacking a defense. The one thing that I will also say about this is just keep an eye on what Nunes is doing here from the standpoint of these various conspiracy theories, because he's basically asking questions like, you hadn't heard of this crazy batshit conspiracy theory. Nope, hadn't heard of it. And that, by the way, is not a defense to the president's crimes. None of what they're doing here is a legal, legitimate defense to the president's crimes. So on the whole, I think it's a very good day. I think Taylor and Kent are incredibly compelling, patriotic witnesses. The evidence is damning, and we'll have to see what happens next. So let me just say a couple things, just by the way, quickly about the broadcast for tomorrow. I'm going to be live tweeting again as much as I can today. Tomorrow, I will be either going on very early California time, like we're talking like 7:30 a.m. California time, or I will be doing an audio only broadcast that will be posted. That's because I have stuff going on tomorrow for work, that day job that can't be changed. But keep in mind, you can follow me on Twitter if you want to get the kind of like ongoing updates, and I will give you guys a recap tomorrow morning, regardless of where we stand, because there's doubtless going to be a lot of spin coming on this between now and tomorrow. And then Friday, of course, we have Yovanovitch's testimony starting at the same time as the testimony started this morning. That is also not to be missed. Okay, final observation here. Kent's closing of his opening statement is something to go back and watch for those of you who are not watching this live. He made this really profound point about the significance of foreign-born Americans, people who were born outside of this country, who came here and who have served it honorably, being among the witnesses that are testifying here, that questioning their patriotism and their loyalty to country is appalling. And he pointed all the way back to the beginning of the origins of this nation, that our nation was founded by people who were born in other countries, that our democracy was created by people who were born in other countries. And that, again, it was a very careful, honorable support for the witnesses who are upcoming, who are folks who have served this country and are at the moment engaged in upholding our democracy by coming forward to testify against the president. It was a really important moment. It was important from the standpoint of immigration policy. You all know the breaking news we talked about yesterday with regard to Stephen Miller and his white nationalist ties, the immigration policy of this country, that 70,000 children have been held in detention camps under the Trump administration based on reports that we got just this week. The recognition that there are people who were born from all over the world who are right now fighting to uphold American democracy is significant. And the patriotism of these witnesses today and going forward as we get further into this process shouldn't be questioned, because it's pretty extraordinary. And Sondland is, in the can again for another lie, but we'll talk about that more tomorrow. All right. Much love to all of you. Again, I will be talking about all of this on an ongoing basis today on Twitter with a little bit of a summary tomorrow morning, and I wish you all the best. Stay tuned. Okay, bye.